What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another video. Okay, so we're all familiar with the police shooting of Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta. The cops have been charged. I just want to touch on a few things about that. It seems to be a little funny because the district attorney, which happens to be black, and so does most of the district attorneys, at least that was present with him during a press conference, is charging the officer with shooting Mr. Brooks. Now, if you've seen the video, you'll see that they were placing him under arrest because he was drunk. They gave him the breathalyzer. He failed the sobriety test that they conducted on the scene. They were placing him under arrest. He resisted arrest. He fought with them. He tried to run. He grabbed the cop's taser. He shot the taser at the cop. Then one of the police officers shot and killed Mr. Brooks. Now, the issue here is that the DA said that the taser was not a deadly weapon and that was excessive force by the police officer. The problem with this is just a few weeks prior, a handful of police officers were fired for using a taser on college students that were, it was a protest that went out of hand or something, got out of hand or something like that, and they used a taser on them. This very same DA said that the police officers used a taser on them, which was considered a deadly weapon. This is what the DA said, and now he's saying that it was not a deadly weapon when when Mr. Brooks used it on the police officer. So it's a little bit of hypocrisy here in the way he is viewing these cases. Clear indication, in my opinion, that this is all politically motivated, is politically driven. Hopefully the charges against the police officer will be dropped because you can clearly see that this is definitely not a case of police brutality or police abuse or something in that nature. Now, here's the issue that's going on since these officers were immediately fired and arrested and they're being charged. A lot of police officers are now resigning, quitting, they're walking off the job. You have something called the Ferguson effect taking place where the officers are very slow to react to anything that might be going on in the neighborhood. Essentially, they're trying to hide out as best as they can. They're only going to respond when they're called, when a 911 call is made. They're also going to be slow to get to that 911 call. They're going to try to do the best they can to distance themselves from any calls or any jobs going on because they just don't want the problems that can come from it. I mean, let's be real. There's a war on cops right now. Not only that, but in Atlanta, Georgia, there is multiple police officers calling out sick. They're doing what's called a blue flu, where they all happen to be sick and they can't come to work. Now, it was reported that in zones 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers of the zones, but there was so many officers who called out sick that the city of Atlanta is being grossly under-policed at the moment, and they're expecting to see a high crime rate. We're experiencing that here in New York City. The crime rate has skyrocketed in just a few weeks here. The murder rate has skyrocketed. Violent assaults, robberies have skyrocketed. We're seeing the 1980s living out here in New York City. I mean, I remember the 1980s. I was here. I remember how terrible the 80s and 90s was crime-wise here in New York City, and we're returning back to those good old days because of this war on cops and now the defund the police, dismantle the police. I even hear calls for disarming the police. Minneapolis wants to dismantle the police department and move towards some kind of public safety office they want to be called now, and they want to put more social workers in place instead of the police. There was a proposal here in New York City about not allowing the NYPD, and in other states as well, not allowing their police department to respond to certain calls like domestic calls and stuff like that, and let social workers respond to these calls, which I think is pretty insane. So let's just say I was married, I live here with my wife and my kids, my family, and I'm getting out of hand. Maybe I'm abusive, and a neighbor calls the cops because they hear me, going off one day on my wife, and a social worker shows up. People don't respect the cops. You think they're going to, respect a social worker? I mean, how is this social worker going to gain access to my apartment to make sure my wife is safe and to make sure my children are safe? They won't be able to. And even if for some reason we open the door and they did step foot in, what can they do to stop me if I won't listen to reason, if I won't listen to their, whatever pitch that they're gonna have for me to try to de-escalate the situation. What are they gonna do? They're gonna tell me about Marxism or something like that from their sociology class, from their gender studies professor. What are they gonna do? What words are gonna use? Sometimes you have to use force, and I should be arrested, especially if a crime was committed. Maybe I assaulted my wife and I need to be in handcuffs, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe my wife is the abusive one. There's cases. In fact, I saw a statistic that said 45% of all domestic violent cases is men make up 45% of all the domestic violence victims. So in that case, 45% of all domestic violence people engaged in domestic violence are women. So what if it's my wife who's acting up and she's abusive and she's hitting me, she's hitting the kids, and she's just getting crazy, and now they have to come in and they have to make an arrest on her or on me. Now I guess I can help out with the arrest on the wife, right? Social workers, but I don't think the social workers will even be authorized to make the arrest in the first place. They probably won't even carry handcuffs. This is just opening the door and giving free reins for crime to be committed, and no one will be held accountable. You want to fight domestic violence, which is a serious issue. You want to protect women and children, which we all should want to do. You will start by having, or you'll start by leaving the police to do their job, to respond to these domestic calls and place people under arrest as needed, not sending a social worker that's going to come here and I don't know what method would they use. They can have all the degrees in sociology or in psychology, all you want. Sometimes you need to use force. You need to place someone under arrest, and they need to go in front of a judge, and then they can figure out what to do, and then we can figure out getting sociologists involved and stuff of that nature. But sending them out to a call is not exactly going to be very helpful, especially if it's somebody suffering from mental illness and they're in the street just getting crazy. People who suffer from severe mental illness, and now you're going to send a social worker there to try to talk to this person. This person cannot be reasoned with at that particular time. They might be off their medication. The medication might not be working anymore. They might have taken another step deeper into their mental illness. Sometimes brute force is needed to remove that person from public and put them in a setting where they can get the help that's needed, not have someone come and talk to them. Talking is not always going to work. I'm sure it will work in some cases, but do you want to figure out on the spot in real time if talking to a person works or not, when that person can easily attack you? That person can easily turn around and attack innocent people, or in a case of a domestic violence dispute, can continue to attack, assault their wife or their children or something, and the social worker will have no control of the situation. They won't be able to restrain the person. They won't be able to do anything. It's really, really pathetic what's going on. Defunding the police, dismantling the police, disarming the police, replacing them with social workers. This is just insane. Gangs don't respect police officers. They're not going to respect a social worker. That's just common sense. But it seems like these far left radicals want to dismantle the police. And I always wonder why. What is the motive behind it? Do they really, truly believe that with less cops or without cops, the crime rate's going to drop? Now, what they believe is that the police are wrongfully making arrests, and that's why we have such a high crime rate. No, that's not the reason we have a high crime rate. Actually, with studies that have been done recently, especially with the Ferguson effect, the police slowing down on reacting to calls is actually helping the crime rate go up. Crime rate is not only based on people who are arrested, but the crime rate is also based on reports that are made, 911 calls, complaints that show up in a database, whether it's in the police department or the DA's office or in court. Not just the cops actually making an arrest. They don't always make an arrest. There's reports made of crimes committed and the person is not caught. Robberies that take place, the person runs away, they don't get caught. Well, that's a crime that's recorded. That adds to the crime rate, even though no arrest was made. So it's clearly that it's not the cops going into these neighborhoods. The cops are not creating gang warfare. The cops are not creating the drug dealers. The cops are not creating the rapes, the robberies, the assaults, the acts of vandalism, property damage, kidnappings. This is not, what the cops are creating. The cops are there, after the fact to make an arrest and to try to keep the community safe. Now, of course, not all cops are good. Yes, we all know that there are some bad apples in the bunch, plenty of bad apples in the bunch. But to dismantle the entire police department, to disarm them or to defund them or to replace them with social workers, this is just truly outrageous. outrageous you are going to allow the inmates to take over the asylum. That's exactly what's going to happen. Now, there's two ways of looking at it, at least for me. One, I think the people who want to defund the police and dismantle the police are just grossly misinformed. They are caught up in their liberal orthodox. They cannot see straight. These are people that are it's almost like cult-like mentality from them, cult-like behavior from them to even believe that this is a viable thing to do. Second, I think some of the people higher up that understand that we do need police, but they're calling for, I think this one is maybe a little bit far-fetched, going into the conspiracyist thing, which I'm not a really big fan of conspiracy theories, but a small part of me do believe that people are calling for the dismantling of police and the defunding of police, so the useful idiots could continue to wreak havoc on a city so they can profit in some way, shape, or form, maybe in the form of gaining political power, or something of that nature, to use that towards votes. Maybe they see that this is where the culture is going. Like I've said before in this video, Andrew Breitbart once said, politics is downstream of culture. These politicians are noticing that a lot of the useful idiots in the street are calling for a dismantling or defunding of the police. So now they start calling for it because, hey, it's election season and they need the votes. So there is multiple reasons to why people would call for such a act to be committed to knocking the police down. I think it is totally insane if you really look at it. I mean, it's insane on the surface. You don't even have to dig deeper into it. I think we need to figure out a way to gain control of society as far as preventing us from being violent in the first place and preventing us from committing the crimes that we commit. We need to get that under control somehow, in some way. And again, if you really look at where most of the problems are taking place, they're taking place in democratic cities. I mean, this is just a fact. Just do the research yourself. Look through the statistics. This is not something I'm making up. This is not just some right-wing talking point. The fact of the matter is that most of the crime comes from, and most of the serious crimes at that come from democratic cities. That's just the way it is. That's where most police are needed, in democratic cities. The least crime will mean less police. They can't justify their funding when there's not enough crime. They'll end up defunding themselves if, or the system will defund them if there's not a necessity for their funding, because there's no crime in their community. But when you look at cities like Chicago and Detroit, Philadelphia, Baltimore, places in St. Louis, here in New York City now with the high crime that we've been experiencing, some of the cities in California, LA, across the country, these are these are democratic cities, and mostly in democratic states, where you have very high crime, needing very high budgeting for the police to combat this crime. And they think by defunding the police, that's going to change the crime rate. It's not. The crime rate is actually going to go up, and we're experiencing that right now. And we didn't even defund them yet. We're just slowly tying their hands behind their back, and we're watching crime skyrocket up. So good luck going into the future with this type of plan. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you guys in the next video.